Hello, everyone. You can call me Captain Clem. For 43 years, I saved and dreamed of a quiet retirement in the little cottage by the lake. I built most of it with my own 2 hands. The porch was for morning coffee, the garden for my heirloom tomatoes, and the peace. That was for finally breathing easy. But then my son married a woman named Alara, and on the day I handed over the keys to my main house to help them get started, the very same day I held my newborn granddaughter, Ivy, for the first time. They handed my dream right to someone else. They didn't ask. They just moved her parents in. My cottage was no longer mine. So I made a decision. If my retirement cottage was now just spare rooms for the in-laws, then spare rooms were all it would ever be. This is the story of how I traded my guest towels for feather dusters, and my dream home for a coop. It's a story about reclaiming what's yours, one egg at a time. But before I get into the nitty-gritty, I'd love to know, what's the one place you go to find your own peace? Let me know in the comments below. To everyone who supports this community, thank you. Your words mean more than you know. And if this is your first time here, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. You're not just joining a channel. You're joining a family that believes no one should suffer in silence. Now, let me tell you my story. I built the cottage with these hands. People forget what that means. They think it's about walls and a roof. It's not. It's about the ghost of your own labor living in a place forever. Every nail I drove was a memory. This one here, by the front door, I bent. I was thinking about Lila, my wife, about the way she'd laugh at me when I got frustrated with a stubborn piece of wood. I left it bent. A little imperfection for her. The big window in the main room? I fitted that pane of glass on a morning so cold my breath froze on the air, but the sun hit it just right, and I knew that would be the spot for my old armchair. Lila's chair. I called the main house her house. It was full of her. The way the light fell in the kitchen in the late afternoon, the faint scent of her gardenia perfume that somehow never fully left the hallway. After she was gone, the silence in that big place wasn't peaceful. It was a heavy, waiting silence. It was a museum of a life I couldn't live anymore. The cottage was my answer, my promise to myself. A place to build a new, quieter life, not on the ashes of the old one, but beside it. A place where the memories could be visitors, not permanent residents. I designed it for one. A compact kitchen with just enough counter for a coffee pot and a whiskey glass. A living area for my books and my record player. A bedroom with a window that opened right out into the old oak's branches. I'd lie in bed and feel like I was in a treehouse. The porch was the real masterpiece. I built it wide and deep, facing west to catch the sunset over the lake. I imagined my mornings there, steam rising from my mug, the world still and soft. I imagined my evenings there, the sky on fire, then fading to a deep, contented blue. This was to be the stage for the final, gentle act of my life. My sanctuary. I wasn't a fool. I knew my son, Wesley, and his new wife, Alara, needed a place. The main house was too big for me, rattling around in it like a lone marble in a shoebox. So I made the offer. They could have the main house. It would be good to have Wesley nearby, to hear the pitter-patter of little feet someday. It felt right, generational, a passing of the torch. The day they moved in was the same day my granddaughter, Ivy, was born, a whirlwind of joy and chaos. I held that tiny, warm bundle in my arms in the hospital, her little fist clutching my finger, and I looked at my son's tired, proud face. The future felt bright, woven together. I handed Wesley the keys to the main house. "Take care of it," I'd said. "It's your home now." He hugged me, tight. "Thanks, Dad. We'll be just down the path." Alara was beaming, all sharp, beautiful angles and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's perfect, Clem. Just perfect." I thought we were all on the same page. I thought the cottage was understood, my domain, my Lila's haven. I had finished the interior painting the week before. The smell of fresh latex and cut cedar was the smell of my future. I was going to move my things in slowly, deliberately, savoring the process. That night, back in the echoing main house for my last few nights, I felt a profound sense of rightness. I had done my duty. I had provided. And now I was granting myself a gift. A small, wooden-framed gift by the lake. The last good thing I would ever build for myself. I had no idea I was just laying the foundation for my own heartbreak. Ilara's parents, Joel and June, started visiting more frequently. At first, it was natural. They wanted to see baby Ivy. They'd come for Sunday dinners I'd host in the main house, the way I used to for Lila. Joel was a man of few words, most of them complaints. The humidity was too high, the coffee too strong, the news on the television too depressing. He had a way of sighing that seemed to suck the joy right out of the room. June was his echo, a nervous little sparrow of a woman who flitted around him, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. "Joel doesn't like the draft," she'd say, and I'd get up to close a window. "Joel's back is acting up," and I'd surrender my favorite armchair. I tried to be gracious. They were family, after all. But then Ilara started bringing them down to the cottage. "Oh, Dad, you have to show them what you've done. It's just so charming." The word charming felt like a dismissal. A masterpiece isn't charming. A dream isn't charming. It's sacred. I'd lead them through, my skin prickling. Joel would run a hand over the custom bookshelf I'd built. "Solid work," he'd grunt, and I'd feel a flicker of pride, instantly extinguished when he added, "Be a great spot for my golf trophies." June would stand on the porch, her hands on her hips. "Oh, the space out here, Joel. Imagine our wicker settee right there. We could have our evening sherry here." I'd laugh it off, a tight, nervous sound. "Well, it's built for one, really. My little retreat." Ilara would loop her arm through mine. Her touch felt proprietary, not affectionate. "Don't be silly, Clem. There's plenty of room for two. It's just so wasted on one person." Wasted. The word landed like a physical blow. The comments became more frequent, more pointed. I started feeling like a stranger on my own property. I'd be reading on my unfinished cottage porch, and they'd appear, a trio of smiling invaders. "Just getting some ideas," June would trill. "The airflow in here is excellent," Joel would declare, as if giving his royal approval. Wesley was no help. When I tried to talk to him, his eyes would glaze over. "Dad, don't be paranoid. Ilara's just excited to have her folks nearby. They're thinking of moving closer, that's all." "But not here, Wesley," I'd plead, my voice sounding old and shaky to my own ears. "This is my place. You understand that, don't you?" He'd clap me on the shoulder, the way you'd reassure a child. "Of course, Dad. It's your cottage. Nobody's saying otherwise." But they were. They were saying it with every "what if" and "imagine." They were carving my dream up and serving it to Joel and June on a silver platter, and my son was just handing them the fork. The tension was a low-grade fever. I started avoiding them. I'd see their car and retreat into the woods for a walk. My sanctuary felt like it was under siege before I'd even moved a single stick of furniture in. The joy of it was being leached away, replaced by a constant gnawing anxiety. That's when I decided to get away. My old friend Reed, from my Army days, had been pestering me to visit. He lived 3 states over. It was the perfect excuse. A week away, I thought. Let the dust settle. Let them get their fill of the main house and forget about my little cabin. I told Wesley my plan. He seemed relieved. "That's a great idea, Dad. You deserve a break." The morning I left, I walked down to the cottage. I unlocked the door and stood in the middle of the empty main room. The morning sun streamed through the big window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was so perfect, so still. I could almost taste the peace that was waiting for me. I ran my hand over the smooth wood of the windowsill I'd sanded for hours. "I'll be back," I whispered to the empty room, feeling foolish and heartfelt all at once. As I walked back up the path to my truck, I saw Alara watching me from the kitchen window of the main house. She gave me a little wave, a bright, sharp smile. I waved back, a knot of unease tightening in my gut. I told myself I was being an old fool, a paranoid old man protecting a pile of lumber. I got in my truck and pointed it towards Reed's, towards friendship and laughter and a world where my cottage was still mine. It was the last time I saw it as my own. The week with Reed was a blessing. For the first time in months, I breathed easy. We told old, worn-out stories, we fished without catching anything, and we sat for hours in comfortable silence on his dock. The knot in my stomach began to loosen. The constant, low-grade hum of anxiety faded away. I started to feel like myself again. Clem, the man. Not just the grandfather, the father-in-law, the Mark. I even started making plans. I'd move into the cottage the day I got back. No more waiting. I'd drive straight to the furniture store and buy that leather reading chair I'd been eyeing. I'd unpack my books. I'd make a pot of strong coffee, and I wouldn't share it with anyone. The drive home was filled with a light, hopeful anticipation. The countryside blurred past, green and gold, and I felt a sense of homecoming I hadn't felt since Lila was alive. I was returning to my future. I turned down the long, gravel drive that cut through my property. The trees parted, revealing the main house. All was quiet. Good, I thought. They're out. I'd have time to get settled, to walk down to the cottage alone. But something was off. My eyes were drawn to the cottage. There was a splash of color on the porch. I squinted, my good mood beginning to curdle. They weren't lawn ornaments. They were pots. Garish ceramic pots with red geraniums. Nothing I would ever buy. My porch was adorned with someone else's taste. I pulled my truck to a stop in front of the main house, but I didn't get out. I just stared. The front door of the cottage was open, and there, in the doorway, stood Joel. He was wearing a bathrobe. My bathrobe? No, it was a different one. But he was standing in the doorway of my cottage, in a bathrobe, as if he owned the place. My blood ran cold. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the birds and the wind fading into a dull roar in my ears. I got out of the truck, my legs feeling like wood. Joel saw me. He didn't look surprised or guilty. He raised a hand in a casual wave. "Clem, you're back." I couldn't form words. I walked towards him, my feet dragging through the gravel. As I got closer, I saw it all. The curtains in the big window were different. A floral print. Through the glass I could see a large, ugly lamp that was not mine. And by the door, 2 large, hard-shell suitcases were stacked neatly. They weren't visiting. June appeared behind Joel, wiping her hands on a dish towel. A dish towel in my cottage. She offered a tight, nervous smile. "Clem, we were just getting settled. Ilara said it would be all right." Ilara said. The betrayal was so complete, so audacious it felt like a physical force. The air left my lungs. I looked from their placid, entitled faces to the violated space of my dream. My hands, the ones that had built this, began to tremble. I saw the bent nail by the door, my secret tribute to Lila, now just an eyesore next to Joel's hideous geraniums. I didn't say a word to them. I turned, my vision tunneling, and walked stiffly towards the main house. The back door swung open before I reached it. Ilara stood there, baby Ivy on her hip. She was beaming, but her eyes were hard, challenging. "Clem, welcome home. Surprise. Mom and Dad are all moved in. It just made so much sense." I finally found my voice, but it was a broken, raspy thing. "Moved in?" I managed. "Ilara, what have you done?" Her smile didn't falter. "It's temporary. Just until they find a place of their own. We're family. You'll get over it." The 3 most dismissive words in the English language. They weren't an apology or a request. They were an order, an expectation that I would quietly absorb this monumental theft, that I would swallow my pain for their convenience. I looked past her into my old house. My son, Wesley, was standing in the kitchen, staring into the refrigerator. He wouldn't meet my eyes. His silence in that moment was a louder condemnation of our relationship than any scream could ever be. I looked back at Alara, at her triumphant, steely gaze. I looked at my granddaughter, innocent in all this, and I knew, with a chilling, absolute clarity, that I had not just lost a cottage. I had lost my son. I had lost my place. I had lost the final chapter of my life before I'd even had a chance to write the first sentence. I turned and walked away, back to my truck. I had nowhere to go. I just sat there, in the driver's seat, watching a stranger in a bathrobe smoke a cigarette on my porch. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the hollow, silent scream of a dream murdered in its sleep. I don't know how long I sat in the truck. The sun moved across the dashboard. Joel went inside. June came out, shot a nervous glance my way, and began fussing with those damned geraniums. I was a statue of pure failure, frozen in the driver's seat of my own life. Eventually, the fuel of sheer rage got my limbs moving again. It was a cold, brittle rage, the kind that makes your joints ache. I walked into the main house, the house I had given them. The air was different now. It smelled of Joel's peppermint candies and a floral air freshener I didn't recognize. It was no longer my son's home. It was their forward operating base. Wesley was at the kitchen table, staring into a laptop. He looked up, his face a messy canvas of guilt and defiance. "Dad, before you say anything, what did you think was going to happen, Wesley?" My voice was quiet, dangerously so. "Did you think I would come home and just not notice?" Alara explained it. "It's temporary. Her parents' landlord sold their apartment out from under them. They had 30 days. They had nowhere to go. And my cottage was just vacant, waiting for them." "It was vacant, Dad," he said, his voice rising. "You weren't even using it. You were off with Uncle Reed. We had a crisis and we found a solution. That's what family does." The word family was a weapon in this house, and they were all experts at wielding it. "A solution would have been a phone call," I said, each word a chip of ice. "A solution would have been asking the man who built the damn thing if it was all right. You didn't find a solution, Wesley. You committed a takeover." It was then that Ilara glided into the room. She had a way of moving that was utterly silent, like a predator. She didn't look at Wesley. Her eyes were fixed on me. "It's done, Clem," she said, her tone flat, final. "They've moved their things. They're settled. It would be cruel and unnecessary to uproot them now. They're elderly. This was a huge stress for them." I felt the foundations of my own reality cracking. They were stressed. They were elderly. I was the one being evicted from my own future. I was the one whose trust had been shredded and used as packing material. "It's my property, Alara. My name is on the deed, not yours, not theirs." She smiled then, a thin, bloodless line. "And we're your family, your son, your granddaughter." She gestured around the kitchen. "You gave us this house. Were there strings attached we didn't know about? Were you just loaning it to us? Because if this is about legalities, Clem, we can certainly have that conversation." It was a masterstroke. She was reframing my generosity as a controlling manipulation. She was painting herself as the victim of my selfishness. I looked at Wesley and I saw the narrative she had woven for him taking root in his mind. Dad is being difficult. Dad is causing drama. Dad doesn't see us as real family. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a profound, bone-deep weariness. What was the point? To hire a lawyer? To drag my own son and his family into court? To become the bitter old man screaming about property lines while his granddaughter learned to walk in the next room? I saw the path before me with horrifying clarity. If I fought, I would lose them. All of them. Wesley, little Ivy. I would be right, and I would be utterly, completely alone. Alara saw the surrender in my eyes. Her posture softened, a victor offering terms. "It's just for a little while, Clem. Just until they get back on their feet. You'll get over it. You'll get over it." This time, the words didn't spark rage. They induced a kind of emotional paralysis. They were an instruction, a command to perform my own emotional labor so they wouldn't have to feel bad about what they'd done. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house that was no longer mine in any way that mattered. I went to the only space I had left, the garage apartment. It was a single, dusty room above the detached garage, filled with my old tools and boxes of Lila's things I couldn't bear to sort through. It had a small bathroom and a hot plate. It was where I was meant to store my past, not live my present. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the springs groaning in protest. The window looked directly down onto the cottage. I could see Joel and June moving around inside, arranging their furniture in my space, hanging their pictures on my walls. I had lost, not with a bang, but with a quiet, seeping defeat. I had surrendered without a single shot being fired. The shame was a hot, thick blanket, smothering me. I was a coward. I had chosen the path of least resistance, and in doing so, I had signed the deed to my own dignity over to my daughter-in-law. The days bled into weeks, each one a lesson in invisibility. I became a ghost in the machinery of my own property. My routine was one of deliberate avoidance. I'd wait until I heard their car leave before I'd venture down from the garage apartment to get the mail. I started shopping at odd hours, stocking a small mini-fridge so I wouldn't have to go into the main house. The cottage was a constant, aching presence. It was no longer Lila's haven. It was the Joel and June residence. They'd put up a wind chime that made a tuneless, clattering sound. They'd set up a pair of matching rocking chairs on the porch, and I'd often see them sitting there in the evenings, a perfect picture of contentment built on the ruins of my dream. Wesley tried, in his own clumsy way. He'd come up to the garage, knock on the door, and ask if I wanted to come down for dinner. His invitations felt like a warden checking on a prisoner. I always declined. The few times I relented, the meals were a special kind of torture. Joel would hold forth on the virtues of the cottage's insulation. June would gush about the divine light in the kitchen. Elara would watch me, her eyes sharp, waiting for me to cause a scene, to validate her narrative that I was the problem. I never gave her the satisfaction. I'd sit there, chewing food that tasted like sawdust, nodding at appropriate intervals. I was performing the role of Clem who got over it, and I was giving an Oscar-worthy performance of a man who had died inside. My world shrank to the four walls of that dusty apartment. I stopped calling Reed. I stopped answering the phone. What would I say? "Hello, old friend. Yes, I'm living in my garage while strangers live in my retirement home. My son thinks I'm a selfish old man. How's the fishing?" The humiliation was a cage. I'd spend hours just staring out the window at the cottage. The rage was still there, but it had mutated. It wasn't a hot, explosive fire anymore. It was a cold, subterranean river, carving out caverns of resentment deep within me. I wasn't angry at Joel and June, not really. They were just opportunists, cuckoos who found an empty nest. My anger was for Elara, the architect, and for Wesley, the silent collaborator. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. The wind whipped the trees, and the tuneless wind chime on the cottage porch clattered madly before the string snapped and it went flying into the lake. A small, savage part of me cheered. I watched the rain lash against my big window, the one I'd installed on that cold morning. I thought of Lila, not with sadness, but with a desperate need for her counsel. "What would you do, my love?" I whispered into the stale air of the apartment. "Would you fight, or would you just let it go?" The silence that answered was my own. She was gone. I was alone. And this gray, lonely purgatory, was to be the rest of my life, a permanent guest in my own story. It was in the depths of that despair that a flicker of something else emerged. It wasn't hope. It was worse. It was clarity. the clarity that comes when you have nothing left to lose. They thought I was beaten. They thought, "You'll get over it," was a magic spell that had worked. They had taken my cottage, my peace, and my son. They had left me with nothing. And a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous man there is. The catalyst was a leak. A slow, persistent drip from a heavy rain that started seeping through the garage apartment's roof, landing with a maddening plink, 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 into a rusty bucket I'd placed on the floor. It was the sound of my own decay. I needed to find my tarps. I knew they were in one of the countless boxes of Lila's things I had stored up here. With a sigh of resignation, I started opening cardboard tombs. I found her high school yearbook, her pressed flower collection, bundles of letters I had written her during my first deployment. I couldn't bring myself to read them. It was all too sharp, too alive. I was a curator of a museum dedicated to a life that was over. Then, at the bottom of a mildewed box marked Important Docs, I found it. Not the tarps, but a long, legal-sized envelope, brittle and yellowed with age. I recognized my old lawyer's letterhead. Tessa. A shark in a sensible skirt who had handled my business for decades before she retired. This wasn't about the main house. This was from when I'd first bought this sprawling, raw piece of land over 40 years ago. Lila and I had a dream of subdividing it one day, of selling off a lot or two for college funds. We'd never done it. I pulled out the sheaf of papers. There were the original plot plans. And then, attached with an old brass fastener, was a single supplementary page. The title made my breath catch. Covenant of Quiet Enjoyment and Singular Use. My hands trembled as I read. My younger self's voice, channeled through Tessa's impeccable legalese, echoed up from the page. It was a clause I'd insisted on, a quirk born from a neighbor's dispute I'd witnessed as a young man. The covenant stipulated that any permanent structure on the property deeded under lot number 7A, the lot that contained the main house, the garage, and the cottage, could not be used as a primary residence by anyone other than the title holder, Clement himself, or his direct, legally documented descendants, in the event of his incapacitation or death. It was meant to prevent a future owner from turning the place into a rental property, from having strangers traipsing through the woods I loved. It was my attempt at control from beyond the grave, a way to protect the sanctity of the land. And there was a kicker, a clause Tessa had called the abatement remedy. It stated that in the event of a violation, the title holder was not required to seek legal injunctions or damages. Instead, he was entitled to take direct material action to render the structure unsuitable for it, unauthorized residential purpose, as he sees fit, to compel immediate abatement of the violation. I read it again, and again. The words swam on the page. Direct material action, render the structure unsuitable, as he sees fit. This wasn't a gentle suggestion. It was a legal sledgehammer. It wasn't about getting them out through the courts. It was about giving me the right to make it so they couldn't stay. A wild, disbelieving laugh bubbled up in my chest, so foreign it scared me. I clutched the paper, this ghost from my past, this forgotten piece of my own stubbornness. Alara had been so confident, talking about legalities. She never knew this existed. Wesley never knew. It was my secret, my ace in the hole. The plink, plink, plink of the leak was no longer a sound of despair. It was a metronome, ticking off the seconds until my resurrection. I didn't call a lawyer. I called Tessa. She was in her 80s now, living in Arizona. Her voice was frailer, but the mind behind it was still razor-sharp. "Clem?" she croaked. "Good heavens, I haven't heard from you since the Clinton administration." "Tessa, it's Clem. I have a question. Do you remember a covenant of quiet enjoyment you drew up for my property on Lake Road?" There was a long pause. I could almost hear the filing cabinets of her mind whirring. "Vaguely. You were very insistent. Didn't want any riff-raff in your woods, as I recall. A rather unusual clause. Why?" I told her, I told her everything: the cottage, the invasion, the surrender, the garage apartment. I held nothing back. When I finished, there was another silence, this one heavier. Then she spoke, her voice crisp and clear. "The covenant is binding, Clem. It runs with the land. They are in clear violation. The abatement remedy is robust. Unusually so. I wrote it to your specifications. You wanted maximum flexibility." What does direct material action mean, Tessa, in practical terms? I could hear the smile in her voice. It means, Clement, that if you decided the most suitable way to render the structure unsuitable for human habitation was to, say, remove the front door and replace it with a saloon-style swinging gate, that would likely be seen as materially compelling them to leave. The law favors the property owner in these specific, covenanted cases. It's your property. The document gives you the right to creatively enforce its designated use. I thanked her, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Clem," she said before hanging up, "send me a picture when you're done." I hung up the phone. I looked out the window at the cottage. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking at a monument to my defeat. I was looking at a project. The cold, subterranean river of my rage had finally reached the sea, and it was time to build a ship. The next morning, I woke up with a purpose I hadn't felt since I'd driven the last nail into the cottage roof. The despair was gone. In its place was a cold, clean, surgical focus. I went to Ivy's farm supply. The smell of hay, leather, and animal feed was a tonic. I walked the aisles with the precision of a general planning a campaign. I didn't buy a saloon door. I had a different kind of abatement in mind. I went to the livestock section. "I need enough materials for 30 laying hens," I told the young clerk. He blinked. 30? And that's a serious operation, sir. You got a coop for that many?" I smiled. "I'm building it as we speak." I loaded my truck with bags of pine shavings, sacks of layer feed, bags of oyster shell, and a dozen galvanized nesting boxes. Then I went to the poultry farm itself and placed an order for 30 healthy, ready-to-lay, high-line brown hens. Delivery for tomorrow. When I got back, Joel was on the cottage porch reading his paper. He watched me unload the bags of feed with a look of mild curiosity. "Taking up farming, Clem?" "Something like that, Joel," I said, my voice cheerful. "Just a little project." I started in the garage. The sound of my table saw ripping through lumber was a war cry. I was building roosting bars, long, tiered perches sanded smooth. I measured, I cut, I assembled. The sawdust smelled like justice. The next day, the hens arrived in a chaotic, clattering truck. The driver helped me unload the crates into the garage. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of life and impending chaos. I looked at their curious, bright eyes and felt a strange sense of camaraderie. They were my recruits. The moment had come. I took a deep breath, walked out of the garage, and headed straight for the cottage. I carried a crowbar and a screwdriver. Joel was inside. I didn't knock. I went directly to the big window in the main room. My window. Without a word, I jammed the crowbar into the seam of the trim and pried. The wood splintered with a satisfying crack. I worked methodically, carefully removing the entire window frame, leaving a gaping hole in the side of the house. Joel came running, his face pale. "Clem, what in God's name are you doing? Have you lost your mind?" "Just a little renovation, Joel," I said, not looking at him. "Improving the airflow." I then moved to the front door. I unscrewed the hinges and lifted the solid oak door I had so carefully hung from its frame. I carried it over to the garage and leaned it against the wall. In its place, I installed a piece of heavy-duty welded wire mesh, secured firmly on all sides. It was a door, but it was no longer a door for people. The commotion had drawn an audience. Wesley and Alara came running down the path from the main house, little Ivy in her arms. "Dad, stop!" Wesley yelled, his voice strangled with panic, but it was Alara's face I was watching. Her mouth was open, her eyes wide with a kind of horrified disbelief. She was seeing the unthinkable. The quiet, defeated old man was gone, replaced by a methodical, unstoppable force. I ignored them. I went back to the garage and started carrying over the nesting boxes. I lined them up against the far wall of the cottage's main room, right where I'd planned to put my bookshelf. I nailed them securely in place. Then came the roosting bars, installed across the now doorless doorway to the bedroom. Finally, it was time for the hens. I began carrying the crates from the garage. As I approached the cottage with the first one, Elara found her voice. It was a shriek, raw and primal. "What are you doing? Stop him, Wesley. Those are birds." Wesley stood frozen, a statue of impotent shock. I set the crate down inside the cottage, opened the gate, and shooed the first bewildered hens out into their new home. They clucked and flapped, exploring the strange new interior with its lingering scent of Joel and June. I went back for another crate, and another. Elara was screaming now, hysterical. "This was supposed to be their home. You can't do this." I carried the last crate past her. I met her wild, furious gaze. My heart was calm. My hands were steady. I turned and looked at the cottage. Hens were already hopping up onto the roosting bars, investigating the nesting boxes, pecking at the pine shavings I'd spread on the floor. The transformation was complete. It was no longer a guest house. It was, unmistakably, a Coop. I turned back to Elara, to my ashen-faced son, to the crying baby. I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Now it is," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the sudden silence. "Just not theirs." If you have made it this far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Now, let's get back to the story. The silence that followed my words was more profound than any scream. It was broken only by the soft, curious clucking of the hens exploring their new domain and the ragged sound of Elara's breathing. She was staring past me, through the wire mesh door, at the impossible scene inside her parents' home. A hen flapped onto the windowsill, the one I'd torn out, and perched there silhouetted against the light, a feathered sentinel. They're things," Elara stammered, her voice a thin, broken thing. "My mother's china. My father's. Get them out. Get those filthy creatures out of there." I didn't move. I simply stood, a quiet general on the field of his victory. The cold, surgical focus that had carried me through the transformation was now a solid wall around me. I felt untouchable. It was Wesley who broke first. He took a step forward, his hands held out in a placating gesture, his face a mask of bewildered panic. "Dad, please, this has gone far enough. Let's all just calm down. We can talk about this." "We did talk, Wesley," I said, my voice even. "You told me I'd get over it." The words hung in the air, a stark indictment. He flinched as if I'd struck him. It was then that Joel and June emerged from the side of the house, having presumably fled through the back door during the initial demolition. June was weeping, her face buried in her hands. Joel's face was a thundercloud of purple rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You're insane, Clem. I'll have you arrested. This is destruction of property. This is animal cruelty." "The animals seem quite content," I observed, watching a hen peck at a stray thread from one of June's floral curtains. "And as for the property," I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the folded, weathered covenant. I didn't hand it to him. I held it up so he could see the official letterhead. "This is a binding covenant attached to the deed of this land. It states that this structure cannot be used as a primary residence by anyone other than me. You are in violation. This document grants me the right to take direct material action to render the structure unsuitable for that purpose. I'd say replacing the front door with chicken wire and removing a window qualifies." Elara snatched the paper from my hand. Her eyes, wide and frantic, scanned the legalese. I watched as the blood drained from her face. She understood the language of contracts far better than the language of a broken heart. Her lips moved silently, forming the words, "direct material action." as he sees fit. This can't be real, she whispered. Wesley, did you know about this? Wesley looked from her to me, a man torn in two. No, Dad, what is this? Is this for real? It's as real as the day I signed it, 40 years ago, I said. Tessa, my lawyer, confirmed it this morning. You can call her. I recited her number from memory. Alara wasn't listening. The reality of her miscalculation was crashing down on her. She hadn't just stolen from a feeble old man. She had tried to steal from a man who had, decades ago, laid a legal trap for exactly this kind of thief. She had been outmaneuvered by a ghost, the ghost of my younger, more cautious self. You planned this, she hissed, her voice trembling with a new, venomous hatred. You set a trap for us. I built a fence to keep out wolves, I corrected her softly. You just never believed I was the one who owned the pasture. The metaphor landed. She crumpled the edge of the covenant in her fist. The fight was leaving her, replaced by a cold, shivering shock. The tactical mind that had orchestrated the takeover was now faced with an insurmountable counterattack. She couldn't sue. She couldn't call the police. The law, for once, was squarely, unequivocally on my side. She looked at the cottage. The hens were now fully settled. One had laid a pale brown egg in a nesting box. Another was dust-bathing in a patch of sun on the floor where Joel's recliner had been. The place was no longer habitable for humans. It was, functionally and aesthetically, a co-op. My abatement was a stunning success. Where will they go? Wesley asked, his voice hollow. Where will my in-laws go? I looked at my son, at the pain and confusion in his eyes, and I felt a distant pang of sorrow. But the wall held. That is not my problem to solve, Wesley, I said. It never was. They had a home. You helped them take mine. You figure it out. I turned my back on them, on my son, my daughter-in-law, her weeping parents. The audience was dismissed. The show was over. I walked back towards my garage apartment, the sounds of their frantic, hushed arguing fading behind me. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel happy. I felt quiet. The cold river of rage had finally run its course, and it had left behind a landscape of absolute, unassailable peace. I had taken back what was mine. Not with pleas, not with lawyers, but with a crowbar, some wire, and 30 feathered witnesses. They were gone by nightfall. The silence that descended wasn't the same heavy, oppressive silence from before. This was a clean silence, an earned silence. From my garage window, I watched the frantic ballet of their evacuation. Suitcases were hauled out of the coop, now smudged with, chicken stuff. Joel's ugly lamp was carried out, followed by the floral curtains now torn and drooping. The matching rocking chairs were loaded into a rented truck. The entire process was conducted in a furious, shame-filled hurry. They couldn't get away from the clucking, the feathers, the undeniable stench of their own defeat. Wesley didn't come to see me. Alara certainly didn't. I saw him through the window, his shoulders slumped, loading boxes. He never once looked up towards my apartment. The chasm between us was now physical, legal, and absolute. I had chosen my land, my dignity, over my son. He had chosen his wife, his new family, over his father. There were no winners in that particular war, only survivors. When their cars finally disappeared down the gravel drive, the property felt vast and empty. I waited an hour, then I walked down. The cottage stood there, a strange, hybrid creature. The wire mesh door, the gaping window hole, the faint, earthy smell emanating from within. The hens were settling in for the night, a soft, murmuring rustle coming from inside. I didn't go in. I just stood on the path, looking at what I had done. I had destroyed my own dream to keep anyone else from having it. It was a scorched earth policy on my own future. The cottage was mine again, but it was forever changed. It would never be Lila's haven. It would always be the place of the Great Chicken War, a monument to the day I broke my family to save myself. I turned and walked back to the garage. The apartment felt different, too. It was no longer a prison of my despair. It was a command post. It was where I had planned my counteroffensive. It was where I had found my spine. The days that followed were the quietest of my life. The phone didn't ring. No one came to visit. The only sounds were the wind in the trees, the distant hum of a tractor, and the constant, gentle background chorus of the hens. I fell into a new routine. I'd wake at dawn to their soft stirrings. I'd go down and feed them, refill their water, collect the warm eggs that accumulated in the nesting boxes like daily, edible trophies. I started repairing the damage. I built a proper hinged Dutch door for the cottage. The top half could open for airflow. The bottom half stayed closed to keep the hens in. I fitted the window with a proper screen, so the rain wouldn't get in, but the breeze would. I wasn't making it a home again. I was making it a superior coop, a fortress of henly contentment. I had baskets of eggs. I ate them scrambled, fried, poached. I gave them to my mailman. I left them on the neighbors' porches. They were my peace offerings to the world, these simple, perfect things that had been born from such chaos. One afternoon, a car I didn't recognize came down the drive. It was Tessa's niece. She handed me a package. "Aunt Tessa said you'd appreciate this." Inside was a framed, cross-stitched sampler. It was beautifully, expertly made. It read, "Indiscipline, no, unauthorized foul play." I laughed for the first time in a year, a real, deep belly laugh that felt like it cracked the rust off my soul. I hung it on the wall of the garage apartment, right next to the window. Weeks turned into a month. Then, one evening, I saw a single set of headlights. Wesley's truck. It pulled up in front of the main house. He got out, but he didn't go inside. He stood for a moment, then started walking slowly towards the garage. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The confrontation. The final accounting. He climbed the stairs. I didn't get up. I just waited. He knocked, a soft, tentative sound. "It's open," I said. He came in. He looked older, tired. He stood just inside the doorway, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes taking in the small, tidy space, finally landing on the "no unauthorized foul play" sampler. A flicker of a smile touched his lips, then died. "The eggs are good," he said finally, his voice rough. "Ivy likes them." "I'm glad," I said. Silence. The gulf between us was a living thing in the room. "They're in an apartment in town," he said. "It's small. Elara, she's not happy." I said nothing. Her happiness was no longer my concern. He took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Dad." The words were so quiet I almost didn't hear them, but they hung in the air, fragile and immense. "I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I didn't stop it. I was just trying to keep the peace." "There is no peace when it's built on a lie, Wesley," I said, my own voice soft. "You can't keep peace. You can only build it, and you have to build it on something solid." He nodded, his eyes on the floor. "I know that now." He looked up, and his gaze was clear for the first time in years. "What you did, it was brutal, but I understand why you did it. We left you no other way. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was an armistice, a recognition of a new, painful border between us." He turned to leave. I'll see you, Dad." "The eggs are on the porch every morning," I said. "Take what you need." He nodded, and then he was gone. I listened to the sound of his truck door closing, the engine starting, the crunch of gravel as he drove away. It was the sound of a door closing, but not slamming shut. It was the sound of a door left slightly ajar, with a sliver of light showing through the crack. This morning, as I do every morning, I went down to the coop. The dew was still heavy on the grass, and the world was washed in that soft, gold light that belongs only to dawn. The hens clucked and bustled around my feet as I scattered their feed. They know me now. I am the bringer of grain, the collector of eggs, the quiet giant who shares their space. I've come to know their personalities. There's one, a bold, speckled hen, who always tries to escape when I open the Dutch door. She never goes far, just pecks at the grass right outside, asserting her tiny dominion. I call her Ilara. Another, a nervous, flighty thing who squawks at the slightest noise, I call June. And a large, pompous rooster I'd added later for atmosphere, who struts around as if he built the place himself, I called Joel. It's a small private joke between me and myself, a way to reclaim the names, to drain them of their power to hurt me. I collected the eggs, placing the warm, brown orbs gently into my basket. The cottage, even as a coop, is a well-built structure. It's solid. It protects its inhabitants from the wind and rain. It's serving a purpose. A different purpose than I'd intended, but a good one. A honest one. I sat down on the stump I'd placed just outside the coop, the one I use for cleaning my boots. I looked at the basket of eggs in my lap, at the contented birds, at the cottage with its wire-reinforced door and its screen window. And I thought about Lila. Not with the sharp, aching pain of the early years, or the lonely despair of the recent ones, but with a deep, abiding fondness. I remembered that picnic, the chicken that had wandered into our spot. Her laughter. Wouldn't it be wonderful to be as simple and content as a hen? I finally understood what she meant. It wasn't about being simple. It was about being present, about having a purpose that was clear and undeniable. To eat, to sleep, to lay an egg, to care for your young, to exist without the burdens of resentment, of betrayal, of a future you can't control. In saving my dignity, I had, in a way, become like these hens. My world had become smaller, but it was my world. My boundaries were clear. My purpose was simple: to care for this land, these creatures, and myself. The revenge was never about hurting them. It was about saving myself. The justice wasn't in their humiliation, but in my reclamation. The peace I had now wasn't the peace I had dreamed of. The quiet, solitary peace of morning coffee and memoirs. That dream was gone, and I had been the one to burn it down. But from those ashes grew a different, hardier peace. A peace that knew its own worth because it had been fought for. A peace that understood the cost of dignity. It was a peace that could accommodate the faint, earthy smell of a chicken coop, the soft clucking at dawn, and the bittersweet knowledge that my son's car might not come down the drive for another week, or another month, or ever again. I stood up, my old knees cracking. The sun was fully up now, warming my face. I looked at the cottage, at my feathered tenants, at the basket of perfect, simple eggs. This wasn't the final chapter I had planned. It was messier. It was stranger. It was filled with the ghosts of what I'd lost and the quirky, clucking reality of what I'd gained. But it was mine. Every splintered board, every feather, every silent sunrise, it was all unequivocally, irrevocably mine. I walked back up the path to the garage, to the small apartment that was my home. I would make breakfast, I would fry a couple of eggs, I would sit by the window, look out at my land, and I would breathe. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.